Okay, I'm going to be reading first out of the story Windows to the World, and it starts with the poem If. If you can keep your head when all about you men are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired of waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good or talk too wise. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distant run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. The wonderful tube spectacles. Gretchen, Gretchen, look! Jan's tone was excited as if she had found a gluten shining on the cobblestone streets of Milken, the cat, with a new litter of kittens. What is it? She cried, hurrying to her brother. Then her eyes followed the pointing finger. The door of their father's workshop stood open. Gretchen's mouth opened in surprise. Her father, she was proudly aware, was the best spectacle maker in Millersburg, perhaps in all of Holland. And in this year of our Lord, 1608, and today he traveled to the next town, for once leaving the door of his workshop ajar. Did Jan and she dare go in and play in it? There were so many wonderful things to see. The sharp cutting tools, the grinders, the shining circles of glass, the leather fastenings and rim horns of the spectacles Lear Lippershey had made for the rich merchants of Middleburg. Sometimes their father let them watch at work, but it would be so much more fun to hold the things in their hands. Come on, Jan urged. Gretchen did not hang back. She too was eager to touch the shining things, and besides, if she refused, her brother would say, just like a girl. Together they tiptoed into the workshop and moved about, not touching anything, while Milken, the cat, followed them, waving his plumy tail. Suddenly, Gretchen saw the things she liked best of all. Magnifying lenses, her father had called them. He held one before her eye and showed her how it made even the pores of her hand look big. It seemed like magic to Gretchen, and now she had a chance to play with it by herself. A fly lit on the workbench, and she bent over, staring at it through the magnifying glass. Suddenly the creature swelled to an amazing size. How the eyes bulged, how hairy the legs. She laughed aloud as she rubbed its jointed legs across its nose. It was a fascinating game. You take the glass too, said Jan, and we'll make everything big. Jan picked up the second lens, and the two children skipped around the workshop, peering delightfully through the wonderful lenses. But they were more interesting things to look at outside. Jan wandered out into the garden and lay on his stomach, watching the ant carrying a speck of food. But the ant's load no longer looked like a speck in the glass. It looked a very heavy bundle, just as the grains of sand in the path became big rocks, over which the giant ant must clamber. Gretchen peered at the skirt of her dress, and suddenly her mother's weaving no longer seemed smooth surface. She could see each thread and the tiny holes between the threads. But finally Jan began to tire of the game. He rolled over lazily in the grass and yawned. It seemed like he had looked at everything in sight through the glass. Then he noticed Malcolm climbing over the gabled roof of their house. He raised his glass to his eye and looked through it, but nothing happened. In fact, he could hardly see anything at all. Malcolm looked blurry. He tried looking at the tops of the trees, but they stayed the same size. Then he looked at Gretchen at the other side of the garden. She didn't grow either. But he went down and looked at the grass close beside him. It suddenly swelled into fat, waving stalks. Suddenly he understood. This glass works only when you look at things close to you, he said, disappointed. I wished it made far away things big too. At last Gretchen sat down on the grass beside him, letting the grass that she had been playing with slip through her fingers. Idly, Jan picked it up and looked through it. He had tried looking through both lenses at the same time, just for fun. He moved them back and forth in front of one eye, putting one close to the eye and then farther away, while he gazed up at the weathercock on the top of the church steeple across the square. And suddenly, as he moved them, he was startled that he almost dropped the glasses. The golden weather clock had suddenly taken a jump toward him. Jan put down the glasses and looked at the weathercock again. No, it was there where it belonged. He must be dreaming. But then he raised the glasses as before and looked again. Instantly, the weathercock seemed to leap closer to him. He could clearly see every feather in its tail as the wind veered it around, and how the glip was worn off its beak. This was much more wonderful game than before. Their father had never showed them this. Jan held the glasses to Gretchen, and she gave a delighted gasp as the weathercock came close. But suddenly her exclamation turned to one of dismay. There were voices on the other side of the house, and yes, she could hear her father's deep tones. He had never told them not to go into the workshop, but he might be angry that they had taken anything out of it. They had better put the glass back at once. Jan and Gretchen sprang to their feet and ran to the woodchip. Where did you find the lenses? Demanded Jan. Here, she pointed, and they both rushed toward the bench, put down the glasses, and hurried to the door. But in their haste, they jostled against each other and bumped a little table. There was a tinkling sound of breaking glass. Turning, the children saw the wonderful new spectacles which their father had just finished for the mayor of Millersburg lying shattered on the floor. Without waiting to pick up the pieces, they rushed outside. On the lawn, they stared at each other in dismay. What would they do? How angry would their father be? They noticed Malkin walking through the workshop door, his tail waving. Well, why not let her take the blame? For the rest of the afternoon, Jan and Gretchen were very quiet. Later in the day, their father came out and gave them presents he had bought at the next town. But somehow, getting presents didn't seem to be as much fun as usual. At supper, even the food didn't taste quite right. Their father's serious face made them uncomfortable. After a while, he said, the mayor's new spectacles were broken while I was away. I suppose it was my fault. I left the door open. The cat must have got in and knocked them onto the floor. Jan and Gretchen looked at each other. The flaky pastry of Mother's special tarragon turned soggy in their mouths. After supper, they went into the garden. I wish we could tell Father about the weathercock, said John. Maybe he doesn't know the glasses make it come closer. Yes, but, she sighed. I know, said Jan wretchedly. They couldn't tell Father without admitting they had been in the workshop. They sat in silence, watching Malcolm creeping over the grass, stalking an invisible mouse. Well, we didn't get caught, he said, trying to sound cheerful, and it didn't hurt Malcolm to take the blame. No, said Gretchen doubtfully. It had all been very simple, but somehow it didn't make her feel any better. Shadows crept over the garden. The tulips stood stiffly on their stems, the colors darkening their cups. Jan and Gretchen looked at the golden weathercock. His tail caught in the last ray of sun and gleamed brightly, then faded into the darkness. Soon it would be time to go to bed. Now a flickering through the cracks of the workshop door. Their father was working. Perhaps he was making new spectacles to replace the ones they had broken. Suddenly, Jan stood up. I'm going to tell Father I did, he said. It was I who pushed against the table. Gretchen stood up too. But I pushed against you, she said bravely. Then quickly, before they could change their minds, they hurried into the workshop. Their father looked up from his work with a kindly smile, but his face changed before their eyes as he listened. It grew dark and stern and cold. Jan went bravely on. They would be punished, of course, for touching what was not there, not for the accident. Suddenly Gretchen could not wait to tell her father about the weathercock. Oh, I'm sorry we touched your things. Very sorry, Father, but the most wonderful thing happened. We looked at the weathercock on the church's steeple through two of the glasses, the magnifying ones. John held them like this and then came close to us, so close you could see it as clearly as if you held it in your hand. Their father's face showed no interest. That is a very nice fairy story, he said. I'm glad you had the courage to admit what you did, but I don't think you can make me forget your punishment by telling fanciful tales. But it's not fanciful, said John. It's true. Their father looked doubtfully from one earnest face to the other. Then show me, he commanded. With trembling fingers, John picked up the two lenses. I held them like this, he said. Here Leprosy took them in his own hands and held them before his eyes. Then they put them down and rubbed his eyes as if he must be dreaming. You see, Father, you see, don't you? He said, dancing with excitement. Yes, I see, their father said slowly. Perhaps all men will see better for what you have found today. Their father spoke truly. The next morning, when they came down to breakfast, they found a strange cardboard tube on the table. Though Jan and Gretchen did not know it, they were looking through the world's first telescope. "Put it to your eye," the father commanded, "and look out the window." This time the weathercock seemed very close, and they could see even more clearly because the lenses were now held steadily within the tube. It was like having a new eye. But the wonderful glasses were to mean much more than that. Jan and Gretchen had looked at the golden weather clock across the square. But far away in Italy, a man named Galileo, a great scientist, came to hear of the tubes the children had to play with. And he said to himself, "If those glasses help someone see across the square, just perhaps if the lenses were strong enough, they could help me see millions of miles across space to the stars." For months he experimented, having a special strong lens ground for him and placing different kinds in tubes. There must be one lens curving outward and one lens curving inward, he said to himself, one convex lens and one concave. One night his dream came true. Before his eyes, the Milky Way sprang into clear view. Now he could see separately the millions of stars which composed it. He looked at the moon and no longer saw the imaginary face of a man, but the outlines of mountains and gigantic craters. Night after night he gazed, discovering new stars that no one had ever seen before. And what was more, discovering that some of them moved. 4 stars, for instance, that circled around the planet Jupiter. "And it all started because of you," Herr Lippershey said thoughtfully to Jan and Gretchen. "Galileo is a very great man. These 2 spectacles, as he called them, will solve untold mysteries. But perhaps, if he never heard of 2 children who were playing with the clumsy spyglasses their father made for them, perhaps he never would have invented his own. Strange," he added, holding the gray cat on his knees and stroking her fur. "Strange. If you had let Malcolm take the blame for breaking the spectacles, all this might not have happened. Ah, and don't forget the weathercock," said Gretchen, turning her telescope towards his tail. "He's very important." And the weathercock, putting proudly in the wind, seemed to think so too. Time to think. What did Jan do to her with the lenses that suddenly made the weathercock look closer? Why were Gretchen and Jan afraid to tell their father what they had discovered? What had Galileo been able to see with his special lenses he had made? And what lesson did the children learn?